Good morning, friends. Welcome to Ecoholics YouTube channel. My name is Avinash Agarwal, and in this video, I'll be discussing with you important current affairs for 16th May 2024. Friends, in today's discussion, we are going to discuss three articles which are in a position to help you answer three questions. First question is that there is a growing trend of protectionism in America, in China. So America is trying to protect its market against China, China is trying to protect its market against America, so on. What should India's stance be in such a geo-economic scenario? What should we do? Should we also become protectionist, or should we allow free trade, or should we be a proponent of free trade? That is the question that we will try to tackle in the first article. In the second article, the question that can get answered is that while India's growth story has been very strong, we have been able to increase our foreign exchange reserves, we have been able to diversify our exports, etc. Yet labor-intensive manufacturing industry is not performing up to the mark. Give some evidence in this context, and why do you think this is happening, and what are the kind of steps that we should take to tackle this problem? This is the question that can be answered in the second article. The third article talks about poverty, and the question that it can help in answering is this: that definitely there has been a reduction in poverty in India in the last 10 years. But we need to find new norms of poverty. We need to have new definitions of poverty. What should those new definitions be? And based on those new definitions, what are the kind of policy measures that we need to take care of new and emerging forms of poverty? So this is the third kind of question that the third article can help us in tackling. So let us start our discussion. I hope that my audio and video is clear to all of you. Good morning to everyone. Let us take this discussion ahead. Okay. So the first article is about geoeconomics. It's about free trade. So what has happened is that Joe Biden has increased tariffs on clean tech imports from China, right? And this has happened in the past as well. Donald Trump adopted similar policy stance in 2018 when he increased tariffs on Chinese imports with the objective that they wanted to help US metal makers or US industries be able to be more competitive in the market. So definitely you can increase barriers for Chinese imported goods. You can increase tariff on Chinese imported goods, but that is ultimately going to hurt the consumers in America, nothing else, right? Now, similar kind of thing is happening now. We are just seeing a repeat telecast of those policies in a different domain. So electric vehicles which are imported from China, now they will attract a tariff not of 27.5%, but of 102.5%. And similar kind of tariffs are being imposed on lithium batteries, computer chips, critical minerals, solar cells, and so on, right? This is during the election season in America, so we can say that this is populism. But the ultimate idea is that it is definitely going to distort a lot of markets. Consumers are going to pay a higher price for these items that they will buy. And even more worrying is the fact that America is sending out the wrong signals. America, for a very long period of time, was a global champion of free trade. Not anymore. They are using the plank of national security. They are using the plank of China's unfair subsidies to justify their policies. The reality is that America is becoming more and more protectionist, right? They are saying that we are doing this so that we can increase imports from other countries. I don't think that anybody is so charitable. What is essentially happening is that they are becoming protectionist, that they are weaponizing trade to a very large extent. Now this is very dangerous. Why? Simply because snapping trade ties in the past has led to world wars, and this kind of a situation can happen again. Now the idea is that free trade is not something which can be so easily suspended. Free trade is not something which can be so easily thrown out of the window. Free trade is backed by very strong economic rationale, the kind of economic rationale that Adam Smith developed with his example of a pen factory. That if all workers in pen factory specialize in narrow tasks, then together they can increase their productivity. Together they can increase the output way beyond the inputs that they are using. Together, if they work in narrow specialized tasks, the production levels will be higher. Same logic applies at a global level too, that if countries specialize in producing certain goods, in certain services, then together as a world, we can help ourselves becoming more productive, more competitive, and we can help in greater value addition at lower costs, right? So producer, whether it is in India or whether it is in China, right, they basically require a very simple edge over other producers in other countries, and that's good enough to be able to drive productivity, to be able to drive profitability. Now what is happening in US is that A, they are extremely paranoid about losing jobs to developing countries, and B, there is a Cold War II anxiety, and together these two are coming together to basically create a policy myopia. What do I mean by policy myopia? That these policies of, let us say, hiking the import tariff and so on, trying to protect your industries, they are short-termish policies. They are not going to work. They haven't worked significantly well in the past, and they are unlikely to work now. So why are these policies being adopted? Again, elections in US are just around the corner, and everybody wants to be seen doing some things, right? Apart from that, what should India's stance be then? We should grab every export opportunity. If China is going to face difficulties accessing the US market, we should access the US market, because US has not taken a similar stance against us, right? So that is something that we can do. Apart from that, what we need to do is that, look, Chinese products, when they are cheap and when they are good for our economy, we should allow exports, or we should allow imports to come into India. If Chinese goods can help us decarbonize, they can help us, become more sustainable in our production processes, then why not? And at the same time, we should take all the efforts to support our manufacturers, to support our researchers, so that we can also do exactly the same kind of production with the same kind of productivity, with the same kind of cost as China is doing. It's easier said than done. It will take a lot of time, but that kind of effort, that kind of approach, that kind of goal setting should always be there in India. That is what I would say, right? So the idea being that China may try to dump their products into India now that they cannot access the US market so easily. So we have to guard against this. If products are coming from China into India so that they can be re-exported to America with some value addition in India, why not? We should be welcoming to that as well. What is the conclusion? Conclusion is that US has definitely set the global trade back, and we have to be very cautious in our approach. This is first article done. Second article, our labor intensive factory slump is no small worry, right? Now in yesterday's discussion, I discussed an article by Danny Roderick upon the US-China trade wars, the new trade wars, right? And today's article, it starts with Danny Roderick's concept of premature deindustrialization. So Danny Roderick, around 10 years ago or more than that, coined the term premature deindustrialization. Meaning of the term is that many developing countries are seen to lose industries, to lose manufacturing factories, to lose, a lot of developing countries are seeing that their share of industries in their GDP is stagnating and plateauing at a very early stage of their development. Like for example, if you see what happened, let us say in South Korea, or let us say in Taiwan, or let us say in China. So then these economies, when they were growing, when they were developing, they had massive manufacturing setups, they had massive industrial setups, and those industries, those factories were contributing massive percentages to their GDP. That is not happening anymore. In a lot of developing countries, even in countries such as India, what we are seeing is that the share of manufacturing in GDP has stagnated way earlier than other countries which have industrialized in the past, right? So manufacturing is plateauing, it is declining at a relatively early stage in our development. And in India, this is it's a very unique problem. We are not deindustrializing for the sake of deindustrializing per se, but what is happening is that we are deindustrializing in labor intensive sectors. So our deindustrialization is not across the board. It is very specific that in labor intensive sectors, exactly the kind of sectors where we want to do well, we are deindustrializing. There is this very important quote coming out of Federation of Indian Export Organization. Please make a note of this. Please use this in your answers. They are saying that when we do an analysis of sector-wise export performance, what we see is that India is clearly experiencing a decline in global market share across labor-intensive sectors. Very clearly they are saying. There is data. You should note down this data. What are they saying? That apparel, knitted garments, marine products, plastics, gems and jewelry, this trade group has seen a very lackluster growth of only 1 to 2%, right? If you see very recent data, so goods export contracted by 3% during 23-24. But if you see the contraction in textiles, leather, gems and jewelry, marine products, that contraction is 9%. So A, they grow slowly, and B, they decline fast. This is a huge problem. This is a huge problem that needs to be addressed. Why is this problem there? There are certain probable reasons which even you can highlight. Maybe that our small firms are having difficulties in adapting to India's GST regime. Maybe because of the slowing global trade, which has, caused opportunities to decrease for Indian exporters. Maybe because there is a preference amongst buyers, right, to go to Vietnam or Bangladesh with whom they have a free trade agreement, and skip India with whom they don't have a free trade agreement. And D, which is again a related point, that our inability to conclude free trade agreements, we keep negotiating, keep discussing, keep negotiating, keep discussing. We say that Diwali pe ho jayega, Eid pe ho jayega, Holi pe ho jayega, kabhi hota hi nahi hai khatam. Kind of an approach that we have in free trade agreements. Is that a problem? So there are certain issues that have been identified. There is further more data for you to capture. If you see the garment exports, even today in 2023, China is exporting $114 billion worth of garment. EU is exporting $94 billion worth of garment. Vietnam, $81.6 billion worth of garments. Bangladesh, $43.8 billion. India, just $14.5 billion. Just. If you look at our growth rates from 2013 to 2023, Bangladesh's garment exports grew by around 70%, Vietnam's by around 80%, India's by around 5%. Stark, right? The difference is stark. Our problem is, and this problem has been discussed and we will discuss about this again. Our problem is that we want to attract big name manufacturing such as Tesla's. We want to give them huge amounts of subsidies, right? Using those subsidies, probably we can create 100 garment factories, which will probably employ 500 workers each, will create massive amounts of job, but we probably don't want to do that immediately. China's industrialization experience of 1980s, 1990s leaned heavily upon small and medium enterprises from Hong Kong and Taiwan. These small and medium enterprises from Hong Kong and Taiwan made China their home. They made these provinces of Guangdong and Fujian hubs of light manufacturing, extremely competitive in light manufacturing. This is the kind of approach that they took. There is a similar concept of Mittelstand in Germany, that they promote their small and medium enterprises, they encourage, they strengthen, they incentivize their small and medium enterprises in extremely strong ways. We are somewhere lagging behind in doing that, right? Our exports are doing phenomenally well, from $167 billion in 2013-14 to $340 billion in 23-24. There has been a massive jump in our exports, but even right now, services exports can face a stumbling block, because we are taking a very stubborn stand on data localization. We are saying that India's data should be in India only. This is a stance which has been taken after a lot of thought and after a lot of reason by regulatory bodies such as RBI. What is going to be the impact of that stance? It will be apparent going ahead, but we need to be very careful in our approach, because a lot of global firms, right, they are making India their hub of operations, right, and there is very serious level of growth that is happening over here. But again, this kind of observations that certain sectors are doing phenomenally well, services as a whole is doing phenomenally well. Within manufacturing, what we want the most, labor intensive manufacturing, is not doing well at all. It again tells you that are we having a K-shaped experience, where our growth, where our development is going to be K-shaped, right? And when we compare ourselves, very quickly to end this article, when we compare ourselves with, let us say, that of with Bangladesh, so it's not that we are just lagging behind in garments exports, or it's not that we are just lagging behind in growth numbers. We are lagging behind in a variety of other numbers related to human indicators, human development indicators as well, right? If you look at the number of toilets and the open defecation scenario, Bangladesh has done phenomenally well, right? If you look at the number of women in Bangladesh's labor force, they have done phenomenally well, right? If you look at the life expectancy of a girl born in 2021, right? Sri Lanka is at 80, Bangladesh is at 74. You and I, that is Pakistan and India, are at 69, right? So we are lagging behind in a variety of indicators. So it's not just about exports, it's not just about production, it's also about human development, and we are lagging behind. So this was the second article. Third article is even more important. It is talking about redefining the way we are looking at poverty. We cannot keep looking at poverty the way we were looking at 1970s, right? We need to do something different. So let's understand what the article is saying. So the context of this article is the fact that NSSO had released results for household consumer expenditure survey earlier this year, and that fueled a lot of debate, right, regarding how much has poverty come down by, etc., etc. So as per Tendulkar committee methodology, right, SBI report says that poverty in India has come down by 6.3%. So if you have read theory, you know what Tendulkar committee methodology is. If you have not read theory, just understand that there are different ways of measuring poverty, right? And there are different methodologies for measuring poverty. So we have a methodology given by Tendulkar committee, then we have a methodology given by Rangarajan committee, etc. And these methodologies have variations in their approach, right? So whichever approach that you take, what you see is that poverty has come down in India. So SBI says that poverty has reduced, poverty is around only 6.3% in 22-23 from, let us say, around 20% 10 years ago. Using Rangarajan methodology, Rangarajan himself is suggesting that all India poverty ratio is around 10%. Now, whether it is around 10% or whether it is around 6%, one thing is undeniable, that there is a sharp reduction in poverty in India, because as per Rangarajan, 10 years ago, poverty was around, say, let's say 27-28%. Okay. And now Rangarajan himself is saying that it is 10%. As per Tendulkar methodology, it was, let us say, around 20-21%. SBI is saying it is around 6%. So whichever methodology you use, a 15 percentage point or a 20 percentage point decline in poverty is no small achievement. Definitely poverty has reduced, right? There are issues also with this kind of, commentary. The issue is that this household consumer expenditure survey, right, it is having a very different survey methodology. So using earlier methodologies, Tendulkar methodology and Rangarajan methodology, and copying pasting that upon this data and deriving some analysis out of it is fraught with a lot of assumptions which are very shaky, right? So that is also a separate problem, but we will leave all of that aside, right? We will leave all of that aside. In this article, the key question is that, is it appropriate to use existing methodologies for tracking poverty using consumption data? See, our existing methodology is what? Our existing methodology is something that we basically established in the 1970s and 1980s. What is the existing methodology's most important idea? The idea is that if I am a person in rural area, and if I can afford to purchase and consume 2400 calories, and if I am a person in urban area, and if I can afford to purchase 2100 calories, right, then that basically means that I am above the poverty line. If I have that much purchasing power, that I can buy 2400 calories per person per day in rural areas, I can buy 2100 calories per person per day in urban area. If I have that kind of purchasing power, right, and I can do this kind of a purchase for, let's say, all 5 members of my family, then I am above the poverty line. So I should be able to buy certain number of calories per person per day, right? If I multiply by that 5, if I multiply that by 5, let's say, because we are having 5 family members, and if I multiply that by 30, because there are 30 days in a month, let us say, right, then I need to be able to buy certain calories for which I need a certain amount of money. And if I have that money, then I'm above the poverty line. If I'm earning that money, I'm above the poverty line. If I am not having that money, if I am not earning even that much, then I am below the poverty line. So what is the poverty line? Poverty line basically is derived out of this calorific norm of being able to purchase a certain amount of calories in rural areas and in urban areas. So we have established these norms using demographic study and analysis and so on. And once these calorific requirements have been put into place, we have multiplied those calories with the prices of purchasing those calories, let us say, and we have arrived at the monetary value of the poverty line. That if I am having, let us say, X amount of rupees, right, as a salary, then I am above the poverty line, and vice versa, right? That's basically how we are approaching poverty, right? So what we have done is that we have arrived at these numbers, right? This number 2400 is higher in rural areas. This 2100 number is lower in urban areas. Why? Because typically in rural areas, you tend to do more physical activity, farming, dairying, animal husbandry, grazing your animals, right? So these are activities which demand a lot of physical labor, right? Bodily labor, right? Therefore, higher calories for rural areas. No other reason, right? So what we have done is that based on demographic and activity based composition analysis of all of these things, we have arrived at these numbers, and there is a monetary value that we have attached with this number, right? Now the point is that Tendulkar committee as well as Rangarajan committee, right, they definitely noted that there is a change in the demographic and activity composition in the sense that we probably don't do as much physical labor now as we used to do earlier, maybe, right? So there's a change in demography in the sense that we have more number of children and more number of elderly in our population now, right? So there is a demographic change in our families, and there is a change in the activity composition as well, right? So ideally what we should do is that if there is a demographic change, and if there is a change in the activity composition, and if there is a change in the times, there is change in aspirations, then we should have a relook at this poverty basket, at this poverty line methodology, right? So both Rangarajan and Tendulkar, they revisited and they revised the expenditure, right? But they did not address the non-food component. Now, do you honestly think that having sufficient food is good enough for you? Don't you want anything else? What about healthcare? What about education? What about having access to data? I'm just looking at these three things, right? These three things. That what about education? What about healthcare? What about, let us say, smartphone and data? So do you think that without having sufficient means to take care of these three areas in your life, you would be happy? You would be considering yourself non-poor? Just think about it, right? So the point is that our existing committees, Tendulkar, Rangarajans and everybody, what they believed is that if as a family I can meet my nutritional norms, then there is a good probability that I will also be able to take care of the non-food aspects. This is a very big assumption, and it may not be true. Why it may not be true? Because India has changed significantly. See, life expectancy at birth in 1970s, when we were establishing these calorific norms and assuming that if we can take care of calorific requirements, then we can also take care of a lot of other requirements, right? In India, in 1970, life expectancy was around 50 years. Right now, it is around 70 years, right? Population above 60 was around 6%. Now it is around 10%, right? So you can clearly see that people are living longer, and there is a greater number of elderly in our households for longer periods of time, right? And they have certain requirements, medical requirements, assistance, etc., etc. Our gross enrollment ratio, right, at the primary level was 62%. Today it is 100%. Our gross enrollment ratio in the higher education was around 6%. Today it is around 28%. So more and more number of our children are coming out of schools and colleges, and they are hunting for new jobs, better jobs. So there is this requirement to educate yourselves, develop yourself, appear for competitive exams, get admitted into prestigious institutions by appearing for competitive exams, etc., etc. So a lot of these children who are now coming out of schools and colleges, they need to spend a lot more on their academics, on tuitions, etc., etc., on education, etc., etc., so that they can position themselves for long-term success in life, right? A lot more expenditure is happening on that as well. So you can clearly see that out-of-pocket expenditure for your children as well as for your elderly on health is increasing. Your out-of-pocket expenditure for your children as well as for young adults is increasing, right? There is a significant rise. So given the fact there is age heterogeneity in our population, given the fact that there is an increasing proportion of elderly in our households, can we keep using the 1970s poverty norms to decide whether poverty has decreased in India? So the author says that, boss, let's just conclude one thing very, very simply. The conclusion is that yes, definitely poverty has declined in India, no problem, right? But it is undeniable that there is very stiff competition for jobs. There is healthcare related issues. So basically your out-of-pocket expenditure is definitely increasing, right? Now, what is going to happen is that a family can provide for nutritional norms, sure, but can they provide for education? And if they try to provide for your education, if they try to provide for your tuition, coaching classes, etc., then this concept of education poverty starts staring them in the face, that the burden of education expenditure can be so high that you will be reduced very close to the poverty line if you try to make this kind of an expenditure also, right? So the idea being that the consumption based poverty measures, right, they are just looking at certain average attributes of the population, that okay, the population can take care of this much, right? But if you are an elderly household, you may not have the income that is required to be able to take care of your healthcare requirements along with your nutritional requirements. You may definitely take care of your nutritional requirements, but there are other expenses too, right? Similarly, if you're a household with children, you may take care of your nutritional requirements, but what about private tuitions and stuff? How do you take care of that? So the idea being that households, they may definitely be above the thresholds of extreme poverty, not being able to meet nutritional requirement also, that is extreme poverty. Not being able to buy 2,400, 2,100, that is extreme poverty. And let's assume SBI is right. Let's assume that only 6% of India's households are, let us say, 6% of India's population is, let us say, below this extreme poverty line. But the problem is that we have still at least 6% of our population below this extreme poverty line. We need to pull them up. 6% of our population is no small number, by the way, right? It's a huge number. We are still talking about 8 to 10 crore people, right? At least that we need to reach out to them. And secondly, those who are above this extreme poverty level, we need to provide them resources for a decent standard of living, because sustainable development goals tells us that we need to end poverty in all its forms. So it's not just about nutritional poverty that you have to solve. It's also about educational poverty. It is also about health related poverty that you need to solve for. So the idea being that let us acknowledge the fantastic work that has been done in terms of reducing poverty by norms which were created in 1970s, and then let us move on towards 2047 with new goals, better goals, new standards, better standards, right? Higher standards is something that we should target. So these were the 3 articles that I wanted to talk to you today about. I have associated these articles with the kind of questions that can be asked in the examination. Hope that helps you. Please pick up value added content out of this. I will share this PDF as well as the previous day's PDF on our Ecoholics app, from where you can download this content. Thank you so much. All the best. Jai Hind. See you tomorrow. Bye bye. Take care.